Planning cities. In response to the disorder and stratification of America's growing cities, a number of municipal leaders embraced the concept of planned cities. Urban America had grown up without much planning. Buildings were crowded together, vulnerable to catastrophic fires. Unpaved city streets bred disease and filth. Seeking to impose order on the chaos of America's growing cities, planners wanted to make urban space better organized and more livable. Planners liked the idea of organizing cities in distinct sections, one section for factories and warehouses, another for office buildings and shopping districts, another for apartment houses and private homes. A properly planned city, they thought, would provide its residents with separate areas for work, home life, and entertainment. Central Park. New York City's wealthier residents wanted their city to be a great metropolis like Paris and London. They admired the urban parks in Europe's cities and thought to import that idea to New York. They envisioned a place in which they could enjoy carriage rides with their families to retreat from the clamor of city life. Central Park, designed by the landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted in the late 1850s and early 1860s, gave New Yorkers all they hoped for and more. Olmsted believed that the park would be more than a place of leisure. He saw it as fulfilling a moral purpose. He saw this natural refuge within the city as not only a place where people could relax and renew themselves, but also as an antidote to the problem of pollution, disease, crime, and drunkenness. Central Park was one of the great public works projects of 19th century New York. Some 20,000 laborers, many of them immigrants, turned Olmsted's plan into reality. They dug, hauled, and chopped, blasted, and planted to create a landscape of rolling meadows, lakes, and separate pathways for pedestrians, horses, and carriages. The park opened for use even while construction was going on. Soon, millions of people were visiting the park each year. They enjoyed summer concerts and winter skating. The wealthy took rides in their carriages. At first, strict rules forbade group picnics or ball playing, but in later decades, the rules were dropped, and the park became more welcoming to all social classes. Daniel Burnham, urban planner. An innovative architect, Daniel Burnham became one of the nation's first urban planners. After designing some of the most notable buildings in Chicago, he oversaw the design and construction of Chicago's World Columbian Exposition of 1893. The so-called White City that formed the backbone of Chicago's World Fair was, in effect, a model-planned city, with clean streets and well-organized, efficient modes of commerce and transportation. While the White City was an exposition, not a real residential area, it represented Burnham's vision of a more orderly urban life. In 1909, Burnham and his colleagues developed the Plan of Chicago, a comprehensive blueprint for the orderly growth of the city. Burnham also developed similar plans for other cities, including Washington, D.C., Cleveland, and San Francisco. Going up, modern urban architecture. As the city spread out horizontally, they also grew vertically. Daring American architects, most notably Chicago's William Le Baron Jenny and Louis Sullivan, took advantage of technical advances to erect skyscrapers, bold new structures that dramatically altered the physical appearance of American cities. In 1884, Jenny designed Chicago's Home Insurance Building, often considered the first modern skyscraper. Mass production of steel made this essential material readily available for constructing a tall building held up by an internal steel skeleton. Skyscrapers offered businesses an efficient way to use space and house employees. Later breakthroughs, such as hydraulic-powered electric elevators, first used in the Eiffel Tower in Paris, made it practical for people to work in even taller skyscrapers. No architect was more associated with modern urban design than Louis Sullivan. Sullivan argued that form follows function. By this, he meant that a building's design should be based on its intended function. A building, he said, should use space wisely and be tailored to the practical needs of its occupants. In the late 1880s, Sullivan designed a 4,300-seat theater in Chicago, the Auditorium Building, which also included 136 offices and a luxury hotel. At the time, it was the tallest building in the city. The emphasis on vertical development remains to this day a key feature of urban architecture in many American cities. New forms of leisure and entertainment. New public amusements changed city dwellers' leisure times and the quality of their lives. Inexpensive entertainment provided working-class urban residents with an escape from work and encouraged a sense of community. Many theaters cost only a nickel or a dime to enter. People went to theaters not only for the show, but also to gossip, to boo and cheer the performers, and to sing along with the chorus. Theaters offered a variety of fare, from Shakespeare to vaudeville shows, variety shows with singers, dancers, comedy acts, and magicians. Not only in cities, but across the country, traveling circuses drew large crowds. Phineas T. Burnham, a flamboyant showman, opened a huge circus in Brooklyn that he called the greatest show on earth. It featured not only exotic animals, clowns, and daredevil horseback riders, but also sideshows, specializing in the freakish and bizarre. In 1872, Burnham loaded his circus on a 65 railroad cars, which took the show to many cities and towns. In the 1880s, Burnham was joined by a partner, James A. Bailey. The Barnum and Bailey Circus, featuring Jumbo, claimed by Burnham to be the world's largest elephant, drew thousands to his three-ring extravaganza. By about 1900, Burnham and Bailey met with strong competition from the Ringling Brothers, who ran an efficient, large-scale organization with an emphasis on family-friendly acts. Around the turn of the century, another inexpensive form of entertainment, amusement parks, became increasingly unpopular. At parks like Steeplechase and Luna Park in New York's Coney Island, people rode mechanical rides such as the Ferris wheel, visited fun houses, and walked through replicas of Eskimo or German villages that offered visitors imaginary trips to faraway lands. On Coney Island, besides going to amusement parks, working-class people visited theaters, bars, and restaurants, and gathered for beachside picnics in summertime. On another part of the island, wealthy visitors from Boston and New York patronized luxurious hotels and fancy restaurants. More than 20 million people went to Coney Island in 1909. When motion pictures came along in the 1890s, people paid 5 cents to watch short silent films in theaters called Nickelodeons. As the screen flickered with images, a pianist or organist would play music to accompany the scenes. In the early 20th century, with all the development of full-length feature films and later of movies with sound, urban audiences packed into lavish new movie palaces, such as Chicago's Oriental Theater and New York's Rialto. The movies and other forms of entertainment offered millions of city residents an affordable way to escape from work, see neighbors, and enjoy the material wonders of the modern city. Baseball and the rise of spectator sports. The late 19th century saw the rise of a new form of leisure. For Americans, spectator sports, football, basketball, and baseball teams organized in leagues. Instead of being observed by a few friends or casual observers, sporting contests were attended by thousands of paying fans, and rivalries formed between teams and regions. The development of baseball can stand as an example of the growth of spectator sports in America. Baseball emerged early in the 19th century as a game played by farm boys in the country meadows, by townsmen in the village green, or by students on college campuses. As the game grew in popularity, baseball was on its way to becoming a national pastime, but from one region to another, there were many local variations in rules, types of balls, and distances between bases. Following the Civil War, the rules of the most influential amateur baseball organization, New York's Knickerbocker Baseball Club, were adopted throughout the East. Teams could now travel from city to city and play one another without confusion. In 1862, an enclosed stadium was constructed in Brooklyn, and fans proved willing to pay to see their favorite teams and players. The first all-professional team, the Cincinnati Red Stockings, was organized in 1869. In 1876, team owners organized to create the National League, featuring teams from Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, St. Louis, Cincinnati, and New York, among other cities. The game of baseball soon became the business of baseball. By 1900, a group of Midwestern clubs, including teams from Cleveland, Chicago, and Minneapolis, formed a new American League and started a baseball war against the monopoly of the National League. Higher salaries wooed players away from the older league to the upstart American League until peace was restored in 1903. Owners then established franchise rules and restricted the movement of players between the American and National Leagues, including less well-known athletes from the minors to the major leagues. In that same year, competition between the leagues found a constructive and enduring outlet in the first World Series, in which Boston defeated Pittsburgh 5-3 in the best-of-9 series, with attendance of just over 100,000 for the 8 games. Beyond attending sporting events, many Americans also participated in sports or sought various forms of exercise. In the nation's early years, when the country was mostly rural, the day-to-day work of clearing, plowing, and tending the land provided more than enough physical activity. But in the late 19th century, as more and more urban middle-class people worked at desks and offices, they began to use their leisure time to pursue physical fitness. Brisk walks in the park or a visit to a local gymnasium became very popular. Shopping and consumer culture. In the last few decades of the 1800s, middle-class Americans were lured downtown by a new feature in many American cities, department stores. These stores were a far cry from the small-town general store with its cluttered rows of practical goods. The new department stores, such as Marshall Field's in Chicago, Fellini's in Boston, or Bloomingdale's and Macy's in New York, were massive, dazzling palaces of consumer commodities. Store designers used glass displays and electrical lighting to entice shoppers to spend. Some Americans began to buy items on credit. Instead of paying with cash, they in essence took out short-term loans to pay for their purchases. As cities added electric street lamps, department stores and other businesses stayed open into the night. On newly paved downtown streets, urban Americans enjoyed window shopping as they strolled by colorful, brightly lit displays behind huge panes of glass. In 1899, an instructor in the economics department at the University of Chicago, Thorstein Vebler, published a biting analysis of the growing consumer culture in America. In The Theory of the Leisure Class, Veblen argued that a new leisure class had emerged and that the members of this class maintained their status by engaging in conspicuous consumption. As Veblen put it, the basis on which good repute in any highly organized industrial community ultimately rests in its pecuniary strength, and the means of showing pecuniary strength, and so of retaining a good name, are leisure and a conspicuous consumption of goods. Not the consumption of essential, useful goods. On the contrary, said Veblen, in order to be reputable, consumption must be wasteful. No merit would accrue from the consumption of the bare necessities of life. Rather, the consumer's good fame was based on an expenditure of superfluities. In other words, the more one could spend on showy luxuries, the greater one's status in a consumer culture. While his fellow economists did not take Veblen's analysis seriously, his concepts of conspicuous leisure and conspicuous consumption continued to inform critical thinking about contemporary American society. Machine politics in the Gilded Age. In the Gilded Age, local governments in many American cities fell into the hands of political machines. These tight-knit organizations were usually affiliated with a political party. Within a ward or political district of a city, the boss, the leader of the machine, would dispense favors to the local residents, who in turn would give him their votes to keep him in power. Political machines grew up in part because in the rapidly growing cities, it was difficult, if not impossible, for individual residents to get needed aid or services from local government. Bosses helped immigrants and other mostly powerless residents cope with the challenges of everyday life in the city. Bosses bought groceries for people, helped them find housing, and found them jobs in city government. The local machines helped people facing unemployment or illness. When residents ran into trouble with the police or courts, the machine stepped in to help. But the bosses did not act in the spirit of selfless generosity. Political machines were notoriously corrupt. The bosses lined their own pockets with bribes, awarded contracts to friends and allies, and paid off newcomers in exchange for their votes on Election Day. One New York politician, George Washington Plunkett, defended his style of politics as honest graft, in which he dispensed essential services to his thousands of constituents. When fires destroyed the homes of his constituents, Plunkett explained that he would get quarters for them, buy clothes for them, and fix them up till I get things running again. It's philanthropy, but it's politics too. Mighty good politics. Who can tell how many votes one of these fires brings me? Tammany Hall. In New York City, the Democratic political machine was known as Tammany Hall. In the 1860s and 1870s, Tammany Hall was run by William M. Tweed, known as Boss Tweed. Tweed's machine controlled many aspects of city life, including the police and the court system. While Tweed did some good work, such as building parks and paving good New York City streets, he awarded government contracts to friends and supporters and took millions of dollars for himself. He was eventually arrested and sent to prison. Political machines were so powerful that few were willing to resist them. But on Valentine's Day in 1892, the Reverend Charles Parkhurst launched one of the first crusades in urban America, determined to undermine the power of the machine. He delivered a sermon in which he denounced Tammany Hall leaders and their police allies as a lying, perjured, rum-soaked lot. It was high time, he said, for the city to do away with the official and administrative criminality that is filthifying our entire municipal life. Parkhurst proceeded to collect evidence to back up his charges. With Parkhurst's help, state investigators were documented and confirmed that city police were involved in illegal practices ranging from gambling to blackmail to rigging elections. Parkhurst's efforts helped sweep out the old Tammany office holders and, in 1895, bring into office a group of dedicated reformers. Its leaders moved quickly to reorganize the city's police force, installing young Theodore Roosevelt as the new police chief. Roosevelt clamped down on corruption and made the police more accountable to city residents. In the process, he gained national attention as a tough-minded and incorruptible leader. Eventually, he would become the President of the United States. Thomas Nast. The growth of magazines and newspapers provided a medium for illustrators and cartoonists who helped shape public opinion. Thomas Nast, a German-American immigrant who began his career drawing images of the Civil War, became the most influential political cartoonist in American history. Drawing for Harper's Weekly, Nast was instrumental in bringing down Tammany Hall. He often caricatured Boss Tweed as a criminal stealing from the people. "I try to hit the enemy between the eyes and knock him down," Nast once remarked. In a sea of immigrants, Nast's influence was profound. Tweed himself is reported to have complained, "My constituents can't read, but they can see pictures." Nast also designed or refined images that have become well-known national symbols, including the Republican elephant and the Democratic donkey. And, in a non-political role, it was Nast who first portrayed Santa Claus as a chubby, white-bearded gift giver.